Something terrible happened. You need to see this. Before you scroll away, give yourself these next few moments without distraction. Messages come and go every day. Headlines appear, disappear, and are replaced by something else within hours. But every now and then, there is a moment that asks for more than your attention. It asks for your honesty. Because something terrible has been happening quietly. Not only in the world around us. Inside us. Many people have been carrying a weight they cannot explain. They wake up tired after sleeping through the night. They smile while feeling disconnected. They achieve things they once prayed for, yet still feel as though something is missing. If that sounds familiar, keep listening. This is not about fear. It is not about panic. It is about recognizing something before it grows larger than it needs to be. There is an old proverb that says we rarely notice the direction we are drifting until we can no longer see the shore we started from. That is what makes quiet change so dangerous. Storms announce themselves with thunder. But slow erosion happens in silence. Nobody wakes up one morning completely lost. It happens one decision at a time. One compromise. One distraction. One postponed conversation. One ignored warning. One day becomes another. Weeks become months. Years disappear. And suddenly people find themselves asking a question they never imagined they would ask. How did I get here? The frightening part is not that people make mistakes. Everyone does. The frightening part is how easily we become comfortable with patterns that slowly take away our peace. We tell ourselves we are only tired. Only busy. Only stressed. Only waiting for the right moment. But sometimes the greatest danger is not what arrives suddenly. It is what stays quietly. History is full of examples. Entire civilizations did not collapse in a single afternoon. Relationships rarely fall apart because of one conversation. Character is rarely lost in one decision. The greatest losses often begin with the smallest choices repeated long enough. That is why paying attention matters. There is a verse in Proverbs that says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Think about that. Not your schedule. Not your reputation. Not your possessions. Your heart. Because whatever captures your heart eventually influences your words, your priorities, your relationships, and your future. Perhaps the terrible thing that has happened is not one dramatic event. Perhaps it is that many people have slowly stopped guarding the very place that shapes everything else. It is easy to notice visible problems. It is harder to notice invisible ones. Resentment grows quietly. Bitterness grows quietly. Pride grows quietly. Hopelessness grows quietly. So does compassion. So does courage. So does faith. Every day something is growing. The question is simply this: what are you feeding? There are voices everywhere competing for attention. Some tell you that your worth depends on your achievements. Others tell you that your value depends on the opinions of strangers. Some convince you that success is everything. Others convince you that nothing matters. When every voice is speaking at once, it becomes difficult to recognize the one that leads toward wisdom. That is why silence has become so rare. Many people fear being alone with their thoughts. So they stay constantly distracted. Another video. Another notification. Another headline. Another opinion. Another argument. Another reason to avoid asking the deeper questions. But distractions never solve confusion. They only delay it. There is an interesting pattern throughout Scripture. Again and again, important moments happened when people became quiet enough to listen. Moses encountered God in the wilderness. Elijah recognized God's voice not in the wind or the earthquake or the fire, but in a gentle whisper. Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray. Stillness was never presented as weakness. It was presented as preparation. Imagine trying to hear someone speaking softly while standing beside a busy highway. That is how many people try to hear wisdom today. Not because they lack intelligence. Because the noise never stops. Sometimes the terrible thing that happened is not that truth disappeared. It is that distraction became louder than truth. Think about how often we measure ourselves against people we barely know. Someone else's career. Someone else's family. Someone else's appearance. Someone else's accomplishments. Comparison quietly steals gratitude. Gratitude quietly restores perspective. Perspective changes everything. Two people can face the same challenge. One sees only loss. The other sees an opportunity to grow. The circumstances may be identical. Their perspective is not. James wrote that trials can produce perseverance. That does not mean suffering is pleasant. It means suffering does not always have the final word. There are people listening right now who survived seasons they once believed would destroy them. At the time, they could not imagine healing. Yet somehow they continued. Perhaps not perfectly. Perhaps not quickly. But they continued. That matters. Because endurance is often built before confidence returns. There is another quiet danger many people overlook. The habit of believing every thought that enters the mind. Not every thought deserves trust. Some thoughts encourage. Others accuse. Some inspire wisdom. Others create fear without evidence. Learning to question destructive thinking is not denial. It is discernment. The Apostle Paul encouraged believers to take every thought captive. Notice the language. Not every thought should become a permanent resident. Some should be examined. Some should be challenged. Some should be released. Imagine someone knocking on your front door. You would probably look through the window before inviting them inside. Your mind deserves the same wisdom. Not every idea deserves a home. Forgiveness is another subject many people misunderstand. Some assume forgiveness means pretending nothing happened. It does not. Some assume forgiveness means removing every healthy boundary. It does not. Forgiveness releases the desire for revenge. Wisdom still recognizes patterns. Jesus taught forgiveness. He also taught discernment. Both matter. If someone repeatedly breaks trust, wisdom does not ignore reality. Grace and wisdom can exist together. One of the greatest tragedies is watching people spend years trying to become accepted by those who never intended to value them. Approval is a moving target. Integrity is not. You cannot control whether everyone understands your intentions. You can control whether your actions remain consistent with your values. That consistency builds something stronger than popularity. It builds character. Character often grows unnoticed. Until the day it is needed. Then everyone wonders where it came from. They do not see the countless unseen decisions that shaped it. The prayers no one heard. The temptations resisted in private. The kindness offered without recognition. The honesty practiced when dishonesty would have been easier. Small choices become lasting foundations. There is a reason builders spend so much time preparing foundations before raising walls. What cannot be seen often determines whether everything else remains standing. The same is true of life. If your foundation depends entirely on circumstances, every storm feels like the end. If your foundation rests on something deeper, storms still hurt. But they do not define you. Jesus compared wise living to building a house upon rock. The rain came. The wind came. The floods came. The difference was not the weather. The difference was the foundation. Perhaps someone listening today feels as though everything around them has been shaking. Relationships. Plans. Dreams. Expectations. If that is true, ask yourself one question. What remains when everything temporary is removed? Sometimes that answer reveals what was truly supporting us all along. It is natural to hope life becomes easier. But wisdom also asks another question. Who am I becoming through this season? Because achievements impress people. Character sustains people. Many extraordinary stories began with ordinary faithfulness. David cared for sheep before becoming king. Ruth remained faithful when her future looked uncertain. Joseph remained trustworthy even when forgotten in prison. None of them knew exactly how their stories would unfold. They simply kept choosing what was right in front of them. That does not remove hardship. It gives hardship direction. There is something else worth noticing. Hope is not optimism pretending problems do not exist. Hope acknowledges reality while believing reality is not the end. That distinction matters. Blind optimism ignores pain. Hope walks through pain without surrendering to it. If today has been difficult, you do not have to pretend otherwise. If this year has brought unexpected disappointment, honesty is not weakness. Truth becomes the starting point for healing. Throughout history, Renewal has often begun when people became willing to tell the truth about where they really were. Not where they wished they were. Not where others assumed they were. Where they actually were. That kind of honesty requires courage. But courage often arrives before certainty. Many people wait until they feel fearless before acting. Courage usually works differently. It moves while fear is still present. One step. Then another. Then another. Eventually the path becomes visible. Not because everything was revealed in advance. Because faithfulness created momentum. There may be someone listening who believes they have fallen too far behind. Too many mistakes. Too many wasted years. Too many opportunities missed. The Bible repeatedly challenges that belief. Peter failed publicly. Paul persecuted believers before becoming one of Christianity's most influential teachers. The prodigal son returned after wasting everything. Their stories did not celebrate failure. They celebrated restoration. Restoration does not erase history. It gives history a different ending. The terrible thing that happened does not have to remain the final chapter. Every sunrise quietly announces the same truth. Another beginning is possible. Not because yesterday never happened. Because today still exists. If you have been carrying regret, let it teach you. Do not let it become your identity. If you have been carrying disappointment, acknowledge it. Do not allow it to convince you that hope has expired. Life changes gradually. Healing often does too. The habits that strengthen us are usually ordinary. Reading something meaningful. Speaking kindly. Praying honestly. Resting when needed. Serving someone without expecting recognition. Expressing gratitude even during uncertainty. None of these actions seem dramatic. Yet over time they shape remarkable lives. Perhaps that is the message hidden beneath everything we have discussed. The most terrible changes often begin quietly. But so do the most beautiful ones. A seed grows underground before anyone celebrates the harvest. Dawn begins before the sun appears above the horizon. Healing often starts before circumstances visibly improve. Do not underestimate quiet beginnings. Do not assume unseen progress is imaginary. Keep choosing what is true. Keep choosing what is good. Keep choosing what is wise. One day you may look back and realize that the moment you believed everything was falling apart was actually the moment a stronger foundation was being built beneath your feet. Whatever today brings, remember this. Your attention shapes your direction. Your direction shapes your habits. Your habits shape your character. And your character shapes the legacy you leave behind. Guard your heart. Seek wisdom. Remain humble. Practice compassion. Hold on to hope. Because even after something terrible happens, the story is not necessarily over. Sometimes it is only the beginning of a different ending. Something terrible happened. You need to see this. Don't rush past these next few minutes assuming this is just another message competing for your attention. Every day, thousands of voices ask for your focus. They promise answers. They promise certainty. They promise that if you just keep scrolling a little longer, you'll finally find what you've been looking for. But have you ever noticed something? The more connected we become, the more disconnected many people feel. The more information we collect, the harder it becomes to recognize wisdom. The more noise surrounds us, the more difficult it becomes to hear the quiet truths that actually change a life. Something terrible has happened. Not in a single city. Not in one country. Not because of one event. It has happened slowly. Quietly. Patiently. And because it happened one small moment at a time, millions of people never noticed it happening at all. Imagine standing beside the ocean. Every wave looks harmless. One wave cannot move a mountain. One wave cannot reshape a coastline. But return years later, and the entire shore has changed. Not because of one powerful wave. Because of countless small ones. Life works the same way. The greatest changes rarely announce themselves. Character is not built in one day. Trust is not destroyed in one conversation. Purpose is not forgotten overnight. Everything moves gradually. And that is exactly why we often fail to notice when we begin drifting away from the things that once gave our lives direction. There was a time when many people ended their day with reflection. Now many end it with endless scrolling. There was a time when silence felt peaceful. Now silence often feels uncomfortable. People fill every empty space with entertainment, conversation, music, opinions, and constant activity. Not because those things are always wrong, but because being still has become unfamiliar. Yet throughout history, the greatest moments of clarity often arrived during moments of stillness. Moses stood before a burning bush in the wilderness. Elijah recognized God's voice in a gentle whisper rather than in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. Jesus repeatedly withdrew from crowds to pray. Notice the pattern. The world often rewards constant motion. Wisdom often grows in quiet places. That should make all of us stop and ask an honest question. When was the last time you allowed yourself to sit in complete silence without reaching for your phone, without turning on a screen, without searching for another distraction? For many people, the answer is difficult to remember. That is not a judgment. It is an observation. Because distractions are not always obvious. Sometimes they look productive. Sometimes they even feel necessary. But there is a difference between being busy and moving toward what truly matters. A person can spend an entire day accomplishing tasks while slowly drifting away from the life they hope to build. Activity is not always progress. Motion is not always direction. That distinction matters more than most people realize. There is an old saying that if you do not choose your priorities, someone else will choose them for you. Think about that carefully. Every notification asks for a piece of your attention. Every advertisement asks for a piece of your desire. Every argument asks for a piece of your emotional energy. Little by little, day after day, something precious is divided into smaller and smaller pieces. Your attention. And wherever attention goes, life eventually follows. Jesus once said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Many people assume treasure only refers to money. But perhaps one of our greatest treasures is something even more valuable. Time. Because unlike money, time can never be earned back once it is spent. Every hour becomes yesterday. Every conversation becomes memory. Every opportunity eventually passes. That is why wisdom repeatedly calls people to live intentionally. Not fearfully. Not anxiously. Intentionally. The terrible thing that happened is not simply that the world became louder. It is that many people became so accustomed to the noise that they forgot what peace sounded like. Peace is not merely the absence of conflict. It is the presence of something deeper. A steady confidence that remains even when circumstances change. A calm that does not depend entirely on everything going according to plan. The Apostle Paul wrote many of his letters while imprisoned. Think about the irony. A man physically confined spoke repeatedly about joy, hope, gratitude, and peace. That does not mean prison was pleasant. It means his circumstances did not completely define his inner life. How often do we allow temporary situations to determine permanent conclusions? One difficult season becomes, "Nothing will ever get better." One disappointment becomes, "I always fail." One rejection becomes, "No one values me." One mistake becomes, "I will never recover." Notice what happened. An event became an identity. A moment became a lifelong sentence. But moments are not identities. Failure is not identity. Disappointment is not identity. Pain is real. Loss is real. Grief is real. Yet none of those things alone determine the rest of a person's story. History proves that repeatedly. Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers. Sold into slavery. Falsely accused. Forgotten in prison. If someone had looked at only one chapter of his life, they might have believed everything was over. But stories should never be judged before they are finished. The same principle applies to us. Some people listening today are evaluating their entire future based on one difficult chapter. Do not mistake the middle of the story for the ending. The hardest chapters often prepare people for responsibilities they could not have carried earlier. Gold becomes stronger through fire. Trees grow deeper roots during storms. Muscles become stronger through resistance. Growth rarely happens in complete comfort. This does not mean suffering is good. It means suffering can produce something valuable if we refuse to let it define us. James wrote that perseverance develops through trials. Not because trials are enjoyable. Because endurance is built when people continue walking despite uncertainty. One step. Then another. Then another. Eventually, what once felt impossible becomes part of their testimony. Many people underestimate the power of ordinary faithfulness. They wait for extraordinary moments while ignoring everyday choices. But extraordinary lives are usually built through ordinary decisions repeated consistently over time. Choosing honesty. Choosing kindness. Choosing patience. Choosing forgiveness. Choosing gratitude. None of those decisions usually make headlines. Yet together they quietly shape remarkable character. The world often celebrates talent. Scripture consistently points toward character. Talent may open a door. Character determines what happens after the door opens. Think about David. Before becoming king, he spent years caring for sheep where almost nobody noticed him. Before the crowd celebrated him, faithfulness was already shaping him. The private life prepared him for the public assignment. That pattern appears again and again. Preparation often happens where applause does not. There are seasons when progress feels invisible. Prayers seem unanswered. Effort appears unnoticed. Hope grows difficult to maintain. Those seasons test more than patience. They reveal where our confidence truly rests. Because anyone can remain hopeful when every door opens. The greater challenge is remaining faithful when the path ahead is unclear. Abraham walked without knowing every detail of the journey. Noah built before the rain arrived. Peter stepped onto the water before he understood how the story would end. Faith has never meant possessing complete certainty about tomorrow. It has meant taking the next faithful step with the light available today. Perhaps that is exactly what someone needs to hear right now. You may not see the entire path. You may not understand every delay. You may not know why certain opportunities disappeared. But not seeing the whole picture does not mean there is no picture. Sometimes the next step becomes visible only after we take the current one. And that is where so many people stop. They wait until fear disappears. They wait until every question has an answer. They wait until every risk has been removed. Meanwhile, life quietly continues moving forward. Courage is not the absence of uncertainty. It is choosing what is right despite uncertainty. Maybe something terrible has happened. Maybe disappointment has been real. Maybe trust has been broken. Maybe dreams have been delayed. But none of those realities automatically decide what happens next. Every sunrise quietly offers the same invitation. Begin again. Not by pretending yesterday never happened. By refusing to let yesterday become the only thing that defines tomorrow.